everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Michelle Medea. I'm Senior Director of Programs and Communications at Second Nature, and I'd like to welcome you to our Acceleration Fund webinar. This past June, Second Nature awarded 10 institutions grants through the Acceleration Fund. With thanks to Bloomberg Philanthropies, the Acceleration Fund is dedicated to supporting innovative cross-sector climate activities driven by colleges and universities. This opportunity was exclusively available only to signatory institutions in the Climate Leadership Network and/or the University Climate Change Coalition. Priority was given to schools that would foster long-term campus community partnerships, had the potential to scale their work beyond the grant term, projects that would be inclusive for all segments of the population, and those projects that promoted equitable and just outcomes. We received more than 50 applications, and 10 schools were awarded funding. And the awardees, as you'll see even today on this webinar, were schools of diverse sizes, types, and locations. Today, we're going to hear from 4 schools about the projects that are being advanced through this funding. Next slide, please. So I would like to welcome implementation liaisons Ben Newton from Central Community College, Susan Kidd from Agnes Scott College, Aurora Sharrard, University of Pittsburgh, and John Pumilio from Colgate University. They're going to be sharing their projects with us. And I would encourage everybody on the line to please go ahead and submit your questions throughout the webinar in the question function. I'm pointing to my screen, which is on the right-hand side of my screen. But please do submit your questions as we go along, and we'll have some opportunity at the end for Q&A. Before we get started, next slide. Before I turn over to Ben, I want to just take a minute and announce just recently, as you might have gotten an email about it today, actually, or this afternoon, we have a new funding opportunity to provide technical assistance for signatory institutions. Again, this is exclusive to schools that are in the Climate Leadership Network and/or UC3. We're accepting, you can go to that website there, we're accepting applications for pro bono strategic advisory services worth between $7,000 and $10,000 in 2 areas, climate action planning and shifting to renewable power. We anticipate awarding free services for up to 6 campuses. There's a webinar to learn more about this application, an opportunity to participate on November 24th. Applications are due by December 18th, awards announced in January, and services to start in February. So I encourage you all to take a look at that site and go ahead and apply for that opportunity. So I'm going to turn it over to Ben now, and please do remember to submit your questions as we go along, and thanks again for participating today.
Okay, I'm Ben Newton. I'm the Environmental Sustainability Director at Central Community College, which could be anywhere or in any state, but we are in central Nebraska. We're about 80 miles directly north of the geographic center of the United States in Kansas. Our service area is about the same size as the state of Maryland and covers 25 mostly rural counties in central Nebraska. We have 3 campuses in Columbus, Grand Island, and Hastings, indicated by the blue stars, and 3 centers in Kearney, Lexington, and Holdridge. We have around 9,000 credit students. Our student population is also quite diverse, with immigrants from over 50 countries, and 70% of our students are below the national poverty level. So we were awarded funding in June from the Acceleration Fund for solar Bluetooth bike share docking stations on all 3 campuses, and we added new bikes to the Hastings campus. Next slide, please, Devin. A goal of our project was to promote future trail connections to the city of Hastings, as indicated by the blue solid line and dashed purple lines. The existing Pioneer Spirit Trail is in green, which will then connect to campus, which is 3 miles outside of Hastings. Right now, the only biking option from the city to the campus is a busy highway that has many large trucks. Our Campus and Community Resiliency Committee also has members from our Parks Department. Next slide, please. So in Columbus and Grand Island, the other 2 campuses that I mentioned, we already had existing trails that connect each campus to the community. There are also 3 other bike share locations in Columbus that use the Movatic app for checkout on your smartphone. Next, please. So on top of the docking station, it shows the checkout and return instructions using the Movatic app. So all you need is a college email, and it's free for students and for staff. The small solar box that's shown in the photo, that powers the checkout system and also blinks after checkout. So you can see the biker even at night. The old bike out checkout system we were using in Grand Island and Columbus, we used battery keypads, and we had to replace those batteries quite often. So the sustainability interns and myself, we assembled the bikes, completed the docking station install by drilling concrete anchors, and they are also getting training as bike techs. As we've already had a few flats, the students are being pretty rough on the bikes. So I received all the bike maintenance and checkout issues directly to my email. And we did have a few when we first started the new process. So in all of our 3 communities, there's a lack of on-demand public transit. So currently, the transit that we have available, it must be scheduled 24 hours in advance. So the bike share provides a free transportation option for low-income students and transitioning recent immigrants. It will also reduce our commuting miles traveled to campus at all 3 locations. So we've already had snow this week, so we put the bikes away on Monday for safety concerns. However, our biking season usually ends in early December till mid-March due to our cold Nebraska winters. Next slide, please. So in the first month since we installed the bike share in Hastings, there was a total of 343 rentals in 1 month, when in the entire year for 2019, using our old system, we only had 334 rentals. So quite the jump since, and they've been quite popular in Hastings. So you can check out any one of the bikes on 14 bikes that we have available on any of our 3 campuses with the Movatic app, and you only need to sign up 1 time. Next slide. So in October, we did a Hastings bike share kickoff ride with students and staff. We also did a spooky bike ride right before Halloween, and the students wore those warm animal onesies, and they rode around campus. Next slide, please. So the Hastings campus wind turbine was the destination of our first bike ride, and next spring we're planning a couple more group rides. The purpose of these group rides is that so that more students and staff become more comfortable with the bike checkout process and also with our bike share. So I want to thank our marketing department for the photos, the Hastings campus president, Dr. Wallace, and the facility staff for helping getting the bikes installed and finding an ideal location for a solar powered bike share. So if you have questions how to get a bike share started, feel free to ask at the end of this presentation. And now I will turn it over to Susan. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ben. It's such an amazing project. It also really points out for Ben to go first and for Agnes Scott College to go next, the diversity of the acceleration grants, as Michelle said. So we will go from the middle north of the country over to the southeastern corner to Decatur, Georgia, and talk about, instead of an implementation project like Ben's, a planning project. So I'm going to talk about climate resilience at Agnes Scott College. So next slide, please, Devin. And I am Susan Kidd. I'm the executive director of the Center for Sustainability at Agnes Scott. We are about 1,000 students on 100 acres in Decatur, Georgia, which is part of Metro Atlanta. So we're in an urban setting. We have about 40 buildings with a total of 1 million square feet of gross space. So we're small. We were founded in 1889 as a school for young women, and then eventually a liberal arts college for women. And that is still our mission. We're still a women's liberal arts college. We were part of the original charter signatory group for the President's climate commitment. So we've had a climate action plan in place now for more than 10 years with a target date of 2037 to reach that goal. And we've made it to over 30% of a reduction in our emissions to date. And the majority of that reduction has been through efficiency. So we took on our plan as efficiency first, adding in renewables, which are not very easy to do in the Southeast. We don't have a lot of incentives and availability. So we're moving into more of a phase with more renewables now. We have an expectation of reaching a 50% goal by the end of 2022, which looks sound, especially as we add in more renewable energy. So next slide, please. When the idea came up nationally to add a resilience commitment to the climate commitment, Agnes Scott decided to do that. So we were one of the first schools to make the commitment to climate resilience as well as climate action. So we have that dual commitment now. And when we made that commitment, our president at the time and our Center for Sustainability staff committed to manage and coordinate the plan, including setting up a joint task force. So the big decision we made at the beginning, following the guidance from Second Nature, was to involve our local municipality in this planning process. So the city of Decatur was committed at the mayor's level and to include members of their staff and volunteers from the community on our task force. So next slide. And this is just a quick snapshot to show the range of people on the task force reflected from emergency response and police, facility staff, as well as faculty and staff at Agnes Scott and volunteers from the community. So next slide. And I'm going to be very quick on some of these slides because my job is not to talk in detail about the climate resilience plan, but we worked through the kind of classic steps. We did an assessment back in the fall of 2018 using Second Nature's tools. We did a visioning process in the spring of the following spring. And then we were meeting in between those meetings, but we really didn't have the wherewithal to actually complete the plan. So we kept going as well as we could with some limited time from the Center for Sustainability staff. And luckily we had a student who had some experience at climate resilience planning in another part of the US who was helping us. So in the spring of 2020, we held a town hall meeting that was really successful on campus. We were holding some meetings with the community, and then as what happened to us happened to all of you, we hit that wall of having to go home to work and study remotely right as we were picking up speed on our input and on completing the plan. So we shifted and did some interviewing of community members about the impacts of COVID-19 to resilience, and then the grant came along, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but that pushed us into this final stage of actually drafting the plan. So next slide, please. So, the visioning priorities are probably pretty classic. You know, the things that we were focusing on, though, just to point out, they range from communications and equity and community engagement, the sort of people side, to the very technical side of energy and transportation and other issues. So, and next. So we ended up taking those visions, and we had a facilitator from our Metro Atlanta Regional Planning Authority who really helped us start to organize our thinking, and we put those visions into these buckets of people, planet, place, and partnership, some of which, as again in your work, you know, there's crossover among these, but we tried to at least get these categorized well for moving ahead. So next slide. And then we took those visions and we started to develop goals. We looked back, as you'll see on this outline, this framework. We went back to the shocks and stressors identified in that first fall and tied those back in, and then started moving into strategies and actions. So this was happening. This was all happening over time with task force input and note taking and putting things into documents to save, but not with enough of an actual formal planning process to move it into a future document. So next slide. So we got the grant. And once we got the grant, we were able to hire the student who had been working with our office and really make her what we called our climate resilience plan coordinator for the summer and into September. And she really started a process of how do you remotely pick up where we left off and do two things: get more community input and start finalizing the plan toward implementation. So we were able to do that. We were able to wrap up the plan and get a lot more input because we had this one person focused with being funded by the grant to get the work done. So next slide. Those focus groups that she did this summer were really important to us. And again, I won't go through these details now, but it's something that I think was a real breakthrough for us to both get more participation and fine tune the plan, but also to have more of a response of a community sense of getting things done. And when I say community, I mean both the Agnes Scott College campus community and the City of Decatur community. So we're now coming out of that summer of input sessions, actually knowing who's going to lead on all the different elements of the plan, the goals, the strategies, and then the action items. And I think I'm near the end of my slides. Yeah, so what next? We're going to partner with Decatur and some neighborhood organizations for even more community input. We actually have a grant from a different funder out pending right now. Decatur has an environmental sustainability board, so they really want to be involved in the implementation. We'll have a final review of the plan. A last tweaking of it is going on right now. I think our last meeting is next week. We'll brief the mayor and Agnes Scott College's president in December, and then they have shown a preference to actually officially launch the plan in January at a city commission meeting. So next slide. I think that's it. Thank you. And I will turn it over to our next speaker.
Thank you, Susan. So I'm Aurora Sharrard. I'm the Director of Sustainability at the University of Pittsburgh. And I'm going to be talking about our Oakland Energy Plan in partnership. Assuming. There we go. Okay. So I am going to talk just a little bit of Pittsburgh climate and energy context and background, which is important. A lot about Oakland, which is the neighborhood in which Pittsburgh is located the neighborhood in which the University of Pittsburgh is located in Pittsburgh, and this Oakland Energy Project specifically. So this is a project that is integral. Trying to get there, Devin. To not just the University of Pittsburgh, but all of the city of Pittsburgh. So the city of Pittsburgh's greenhouse gas emissions, as you can see from 2013, about 80% come from buildings, and about 50% of those come from commercial buildings, which universities fall into the category of. In the city of Pittsburgh, there are a number of higher education institutions distributed throughout. You can sort of see this cluster in the middle between the three rivers with Pitt, Carnegie Mellon University, Chatham, and Carlow. That is where Oakland is, the neighborhood in which we exist. But for a long time, this group of universities have collaborated through the Higher Education Climate Consortium on reducing the greenhouse gas emissions of Pittsburgh. Also, most of these universities are partners and committed to the International 2030 Challenge. For those of you who are familiar with the building industry specifically, this is an international challenge that came from Architecture 2030, which essentially says if we want to solve climate change, buildings are a major part of the solution. Existing buildings have a goal to reduce emissions 50% below baselines by the year 2030, and new buildings have a goal for carbon neutrality construction by 2030 as well. Pitt, Carnegie Mellon, Carlow, Duquesne University, Point Park University are strong partners of applying these goals in Pittsburgh through something called the Pittsburgh 2030 District. It's facilitated by a nonprofit called Green Building Alliance, which has 556 buildings committed to those rather aggressive goals, over 86 million square feet. That wonky little diagram sort of in the middle, that's where Oakland is, the nice triangle over to your left, that's the golden triangle of downtown Pittsburgh. And at Pitt, because we've been committed to these energy and conservation goals for so long, we've been tracking from our buildings what our energy use intensity per square foot is. This is our general trend. For those of you who don't love the numbers here, orange is where we are, and you can see that go up since we're tracking it. And then, you know, we really got serious about efficiency and it's gone down. For 2020, we celebrated our lowest energy use intensity as a university since we started tracking in 2008, which is really great. We're below our goal, but we are still chasing that 50% reduction goal campus-wide. And like I said before, we are located in the neighborhood of Oakland. It's a longtime residential community. There are obviously town and gown considerations. There are a number of smaller, diverse businesses, and it is a very energy-intensive neighborhood in Pittsburgh, which you'll see in a minute. We have lots of opportunities as a neighborhood and as partners in a neighborhood, but we're really just starting to push on all of those and what they are. When you look at energy specifically, the neighborhood of Oakland has 409 different buildings, 33 million square feet. And of that 33 million, you see almost 30 million is committed to those 2030 challenge goals, which is amazing. Altogether, the Oakland 2030 partners use almost 20% of all of Pittsburgh's energy. So if you're looking for opportunities citywide, Oakland is a great place to start, and universities make up a lot of Oakland. And you can see a little bit, this is a little bit of an eye chart, but if you look at downtown Pittsburgh and the neighborhood of Oakland, the takeaway here is while downtown has more square footage, Oakland actually uses more energy than downtown Pittsburgh, 1.4 times as much energy, and its buildings are much more energy intensive because we have a large number of healthcare facilities and laboratories. And there are lots of existing organizations that are overlapping in Oakland as well. You can see these are all the master plans and institutional master plans that we sort of have to align with: the University of Pittsburgh, the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, Carlow, Carnegie Mellon, the Carnegie Museums. There's a larger neighborhood plan right now. So if we're trying to get anything done in terms of energy, we have to work together. This is one of the reasons we started an Oakland energy conversation. It's led by the City of Pittsburgh and Green Building Alliance. You can see the other partners listed here as well, including Duquesne Light Company, which is our electric utility, and the City of Aarhus in Denmark, which the City of Pittsburgh has a district energy partnership with. And one of our first steps in this partnership was really to map what our existing assets were. And so, you know, for those of you who don't know the geography, this doesn't mean anything, but, you know, we have a lot of underground steam infrastructure. We have chilled water connecting universities and healthcare, electricity, and a small amount of renewables, but it's a very dense urban area. So we don't have a lot of on-site generation there. And what that looks like for the University of Pittsburgh, if we look at our fiscal year 19 greenhouse gas emissions, when we look at our balance sheet, energizing our campus, our buildings, that's about 60% of all of our contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. So if we're looking to reduce, we've got to look there. As many of you know, purchased electricity is something that we can take care of with purchasing or generating renewables, but you see steam and natural gas up there is a fairly large percentage of what's left on our greenhouse gas balance sheet. And so we've started to map out what that looks like, how it's changing over time, what our energy sources are, and what that looks like for Pitt is fairly reflective of what it looks like for the rest of Oakland and that energy partnership. And so we're undergoing our first Pitt Climate Action Plan right now, trying to project out what that looks like for us in the future as we reach towards carbon neutrality by 2037. And when we look at that STEAM opportunity and what energy in Oakland looks like for Pitt, but also for all of those partners, we started coming to the table and saying, we need somebody to help us do this. So the project that we're funded for under the Acceleration Fund is to help this Oakland Energy Collaboration. We have a request, we put out a request for qualifications earlier this year, really emphasizing all of the things on this list, most of which you would expect. I do want to call out affordability in Pittsburgh. That's a big thing, but also because of the residential nature of Oakland and the energy demands on the neighborhood. We want to make sure that there's equity there in residential pricing. And then we also want to make sure that there's an equity component to everything that we're doing in the energy space. And so our energy efforts are actually wrapped in this larger Oakland neighborhood plan for the city of Pittsburgh. You can sort of see where we are in that overall process. We are here. We're part of the infrastructure action team, which just kicked off. This is a long-term project, and it'll sort of feed into this overall neighborhood plan, which will end by mid-2022. And so for the energy project specifically, we've broken it out into a number of phases, really just getting a scan of where we are now in terms of supply and demand, how different governing and policy limitations in Pennsylvania help us move forward or hinder us, and then moving into the future, like what does that look like in Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania, which many of you have seen play out in the news recently. And then phase 3 is, once we know all of these things, how can we move this forward in a way that really advances Pitt's carbon neutrality goals, but also the whole higher education climate coalition's collaboration. And so there are pieces of this, right? The city of Pittsburgh commits to some things. Green Building Alliance, oops, I missed one. There's a missing column there. Green Building Alliance commits to other things, and the institutions commit as well. But really the next steps for us in this journey is these regular meetings of the Oakland Energy Technical Advisory Committee. There's a Belfield boiler plant meeting. So this is one of our major steam plants that has unique governing issues. And then we're hoping to put a full request for proposals out for that scope in December of this year, and really issue the contract in 2021. So that was a lot of detail. If you're interested, please reach out and let me know. And if you really want to see the details of what we asked, you can go to this website and pull down the RFQ. So thank you. With that, I will turn it over to John.
Thank you, Aurora. And I think I'm going to have ability to drive here soon. Advance the slides. I'm John Pumilio. I'm the Director of Sustainability at Colgate University, and it's great to look at the attendee list today. It's like a mini all-star list of sustainability leaders in higher ed. So thanks so much for taking the time today to join us. And like our colleagues who went before me, I'm probably going to talk a little bit about the story at my university, at Colgate University, and how the Climate Acceleration Fund fits into that to help advance our ongoing work. So that's me. When I used to have my hair cut professionally, now it's just a combination of myself and my 9-year-old son who helps cut my hair. So that's where we're at. And, Ben mentioned that he's in the geographic center of the country. Colgate University is in Hamilton, New York, which is in the geographic center of New York State. So we are landlocked. And I think some of you are familiar with Colgate, but we're a smallish private liberal arts university, under 3,000 undergraduate students. I think if there's a few things that kind of, that in an area where we stand out, we're a small school, but we're Division I athletics. A lot of our students study abroad. And we have a lot of buildings, a lot of small buildings. So 160 buildings encompass 2.3 million square feet of space. So that just adds a different sort of dynamic when thinking about climate action planning. And then our total cost tuition plus is just north of $70,000 a year for our students. You know, our climate action planning, our trajectory is not that different from a lot of other schools. You know, it started with student and faculty passion and insistence that our on-campus practices mirror our values and the things that we were teaching in our classroom. So an environmental council was charged by the president. A few years later, Colgate signed on to the American College and University President's Climate Commitment, today's Second Nature's carbon commitment. That was back in 2008 in the fall. And then in 2009, I was hired to complete our first greenhouse gas inventory for the organization. I had familiarity with doing this because I was with Ben, actually, at the Evergreen State College back in the Pacific Northwest, where I was their director of sustainability before I came back home to the Northeast. We did that work. We found out what our footprint is. And then, of course, what naturally follows after that is climate action planning. We have to figure out how are we going to draw down our footprint and what's our carbon neutrality goal. We established a fairly aggressive carbon neutrality goal. It was 2019. It was a 5-year plan. So we implemented, you know, just over 20 different projects that were in the plan to draw down our campus carbon footprint. And then in 2017, we released our Sustainability and Climate Action Plan version 2, which takes us to today. We did achieve carbon neutrality in 2019, and I'll talk a little bit more, you know, about that in the upcoming slides. So this is being recorded. I'm going to flip through some of these slides pretty quickly. I think everybody who's experienced this realizes that sustainability manifests itself differently depending on specific institutional situations and where you are geographically and all that. This is what ours looked like when we were at the ground level, just getting started. So some behavior change stuff, some renewable energy stuff, a lot of efficiency stuff, some fuel switching, and on and on. Green buildings, of course, played a big part in that. After we gave ourselves a 10-year grace period to try to draw down our footprint as much as possible, and then we realized we would be stuck with some emissions as long as we're measuring, you know, air travel and commuter emissions. Then we knew that we would have a footprint in 2019, which we did. So we just offset the rest. And, you know, we're carbon neutral, but our work is still at the front end. I imagine this work will be going on long after I retire, like many of you. So, you know, now that we've achieved carbon neutrality, where are we? We still have to reduce emissions on campus, and we still have a lot of opportunities for that. We invest in high quality carbon offset projects. And there's a whole presentation behind that about how we approach that. So don't hesitate to reach out to me if I can help sort of wrap your heads around how at least one university in central New York approaches that. And then the big body of work that's coming up in the next year is resilience. We want to sign we haven't signed on yet the Second Nature's climate commitment, the resilience commitment part of this work. We were going to do it last Earth Day, but of course COVID hit right around there. The work continued, but we were looking for, you know, to make the recognition on campus so that our students were aware of it, our faculty were aware of it, and everybody was just obviously really distracted at that time, wondering about what's going to happen with the rest of the spring semester, the summer leading into the fall. So we tabled it, and we plan on signing the resilience commitment on our next Earth Day. And then we're also in the process of updating our third sustainability and climate action plan. So we're pretty excited about that, at least as excited as you can be about planning. And then I want to tell you just a little bit of a story about resilience. I'm going to go quick here because these are mostly visuals, but I want to just tell the story of one small project that we have on campus. And this is our community garden project. And that was our former interim president, Lyle Roloffs, who's now the president of Berea College. And he helped to break ground for our community garden project back in 2010. All the shrubbery behind everybody is there's a little stream over there. And we knew it was close to the body of water, but it was in a 100-year floodplain and it hadn't flooded in years. So we figured we could endure we could endure an occasional flood in this area, but that's not what happened. So in the summer, we broke ground. By middle of summer, we were actually quite productive, and the garden was doing everything that we imagined it would do. And then in the fall, we had our first flood. So all of our, right in time for the harvest. So the garden flooded out, and that was like an eye opener, not a good start to a lot of hard work. But we figured it's a 100-year floodplain. So there's only a 1% chance of it flooding again in the next year. Unfortunately, in April, in the next growing season, right after we weeded and got our vegetables planted, we endured the ground was saturated with water, and we got some really heavy rain events. And we had our second flood within just a few months. So that pretty much we had to start over again. Mother Nature and climate change gave us a year off. And then in June 2013, we had our third flood. This was the most massive of them all. The picture on the right is one of our garden interns kayaking through the parking lot into our garden project. So it was a complete washout. This was a severe flood that impacted our entire county. And I'll show you some pictures coming up in just a few minutes. So now what was once a 100-year floodplain is no longer a 100-year floodplain. It's now almost an annual event. So we had to move. That's what we did. I tell you this story because I think there's so much attention on climate impacts in coastal communities, but here we are in central New York, landlocked, and we're getting hit pretty hard in our area with extreme weather events. In fact, in the last 20 years, we've had 19 FEMA declared disasters in our county. So we are quite familiar with the impacts of climate change in a very small, rural, landlocked setting. We moved, we found another property on, this was great actually. We had a nice greenhouse to sort of augment our growing season. This was right adjacent to our campus. So we were pretty excited about moving into this spot. So that happened in the spring of 2014. We recovered the garden. A more translucent covering would allow more light to come through, which extended our growing season even further. And we were well underway. We were pretty excited about this. However, as climate change models predicted, because there's more moisture in the air, we started getting really, really heavy snowfall events. And that greenhouse had been standing for 20 years. It wasn't a brand new greenhouse by any means, but the snowstorm that we got in 2017 just collapsed it. We had 31 inches of snow in just about 24 hours, and it was really wet stuff, so it was pretty heavy, and collapsed our greenhouse along with greenhouses all over the county, as well as roof damage and other damages. So we're getting pretty familiar again with all of this. This is not Missouri. This is not in an area near the Missouri River or near any of these other places in the Midwest that we've come accustomed to seeing this sort of flooding. This is in central New York in the county where I live, and it was a complete disaster. These were the very heavy rain events that we had in 2013. Lots and lots of testimonials about people who weren't accustomed to seeing this sort of stuff. it did a lot of damage in our county. 250 homes were evacuated, roads and culverts washed out pretty much all over the county. Our farmers really suffered quite a bit from this. And then we had our first ever water rescues. I could show you more recent pictures because we've, in fact, just last Halloween, not the one that just passed, but the one before that, we had another extremely heavy rain event, and that caused sinkholes, swallowed cars in places we haven't seen before. So like many of you, we're experiencing climate change in a different way. So, you know, you can talk about these things with people till you're blue in the face, but until we start experiencing them and feeling them firsthand, that's when it starts to hit home just a little bit differently. So now our community members, people in the town and the village of Hamilton, in the place where Colgate University exists, started to take note. So Hamilton's a small community. The town has just over 5,000 people. It's a relatively poor county, except for the existence of Colgate University and all that we bring to our area. And then once again, there's the declared FEMA event since the year 2000, averaging almost one a year. So while the university was doing all of this work on campus, our carbon neutrality goal and all of that, and the village and the town and the residents were becoming more aware of these climate impacts, New York State rolled out a really cool program called the Climate Smart Communities Program. And it's almost like LEED building certification, where there's all these actions that a local community can take. And when you take these actions, you accumulate points and you can receive certification for that. So we thought this was a pretty cool framework to get work done, to engage local citizens, elected officials, and other leaders in our municipality to galvanize around this work. So that's, this is a snapshot of where we stand today. There's 313 municipalities throughout New York that have signed a pledge to become climate smart communities. These towns and villages and cities are working really hard to become certified. Our work in Hamilton started in 2016. A colleague of mine, one of my faculty colleagues, had a kickoff meeting in 2016 where we gathered some of our local leaders and said, this is what we're experiencing, of course, and here's a way forward. And that started what we now call the Hamilton Climate Preparedness Working Group. We've received a lot of help from Second Nature over the years with resilience planning and some of the stuff that they use to host meetings and other things. So this is just a snapshot of who is involved in this work. So we have, again, elected officials from the town and the village. We have Madison County Planning Department, Partnership for Community Development, Hamilton Business Alliance, our local school district, Cornell Cooperative Extension, which works closely with our agricultural community, the university, of course, and then community members, which are appointed by the mayor and the supervisor of the town of Hamilton. So it's a really wonderful group. We've been taking our time over the years because we think there's actually more value in the process and engaging people than there is in any fast and furious outcome. So we have a really strong commitment to this now at the local level, I would say. We did hold a climate resilience workshop in 2019, and I wanted to just mention that we engage actively a lot of our students in this work. These are students from an environmental studies course where they helped to lead these workshops and then also synthesize them and put out next steps and recommendations. They really get motivated by this work, of course, because they feel like they're making real world impact, and they get to meet some people off campus that they wouldn't normally have a chance to work with. This is too much for one slide, in the amount that I'm going to go through, but I did want to show this little matrix because this shows some of the work the Hamilton Climate Preparedness Working Group has done over the years. And then what's in progress right now in the yellow, we're working on a climate action plan. And we are rolling into that our resilience plan and vulnerability assessments. So the town and the village of Hamilton received bronze certification for the Climate Smart Communities program back earlier this year, which was exciting to people. It was a nice milestone for us. And the Climate Acceleration Fund really fits in with this because with the funding that we received, we were able to hire a consultant to help us with municipal climate action planning at both the town and the village level. This is exactly what one of the main intents of the Climate Acceleration Fund was, to show the sort of town-gown collaborative working relationship and how the fund can be used to support that. So Andrew was a former student of mine. He worked in the Office of Sustainability when he was a student, and he helped me develop our greenhouse gas calculator. And then also I've worked on and off with him over the years to do feasibility reports and eventually implement some sustainability projects on campus. After he graduated, he ended up working for a consulting firm, ICF, and was doing, which was hired by the EPA to do the energy emissions inventory for the United States. So just a little bit of a step up from Colgate University. He ended up becoming, worked in the Office of Sustainability at the University of Virginia. He still works part-time in that role, but he now owns his own consulting firm, which was a great way for us to work with him. So I think it kind of shows the full circle parts of this and the benefits of how one example of a climate acceleration fund can be used. So we're going to have a municipal climate action plan for both the town and the village at the beginning of the new year. We are well on pace to complete that. And that's the end of my presentation. And I went through things pretty quick. This whole session was pretty quick, so I hope that you reach out to one or any of us with any questions. And now I'm going to turn it over to our host to facilitate any questions.
If I could ask all of the presenters to please put yourselves back on camera if you can, and still encourage attendees to submit questions through the Q&A function. I'm going to start kind of big, and then we'll get a little bit more specific. So it's been a year, right? It's just been a year for all of us, probably personally and professionally and within our communities. How has, I'm sure in the spring, every institution was responding quickly as needed. Your jobs probably changed in ways you could never imagine as you responded to COVID challenges on your campus. But how has COVID, how has it shifted your institution's priorities around climate? Was there an opportunity here to do things you might not have done otherwise? Was the administration supportive of any new directions you were taking? Were there opportunities or challenges with respect to your climate plans and your climate actions that COVID presented? So we can just, somebody can go ahead and get started with that. I'd appreciate it.
I can go first since, we're in the middle of our first climate action plan, right? So we announced our carbon neutrality goal in February of this year, and we knew we needed to create a carbon commitment committee and move into our plan. There has been no change in the institution's commitment to any of those pre-COVID goals. I would say how we're deploying and engaging people as we write the first PIC climate action plan is obviously different. We're trying to do it remotely. We're trying to get in those different rooms, but those rooms are all virtual, right? So that makes engagement harder for us, specifically to the Oakland Energy project that we're working on. I mean, most honestly, there's a budget concern there, right? Like pre-COVID, we would have been funding this project differently than it is likely to be funded now.
Susan?
Yeah, so I work for the president's office, and the president at Agnes Scott is my boss. direct boss. And so when all this started happening, obviously she and her management team are the people with the biggest decision making. And so I'll always remember the first call I had with her was, I asked her, do I keep doing what I'm doing? Because in my mind, anybody employed by the college could have had to shift into a emergency role or whatever. And her response was, climate change is more important today than it was before this pandemic started. She philosophically, intellectually, and emotionally believed that we should keep doing what we were doing. And so it was a great push into, really sort of doing more, but of the same. I mean, I will say probably all of us, we were diverted occasionally. Probably our biggest diversion was with facilities to more precisely monitor our utility use during a remote period. And that was really interesting, obviously, to watch the change and the savings and the sort of being right on top of, the way the buildings were being managed when no one was on campus, to be managed in a way that they wouldn't be damaged in any way, but still that we would see some significant savings. And those savings ended up being part of what was talked about in terms of the way we were dealing with a tighter budget. So it was very rewarding to work on that. So, yeah.
Ben, I would think you'd have specific challenges with your bike share program during a pandemic.
Oh, yes. Yeah. First, I just wanted to go into our climate action plan. Our commitment hasn't changed. We have reduced our overall emissions about 57% since 2013. A thing I did find out is, now our facilities office and administration, they do have a little bit more time, I want to say, to work on projects that, we had delayed in the past. So like we have electric vehicle charging stations. That was kind of a project that I was working on, and on all 4 of our campuses. Well, now we're moving forward with installing all 4 of those charging stations. We've already got 2 installed, and I'm working on the second 2 on the other campuses. But also, in regards to climate action planning, it's all going to change in 2020. We don't have commuting emissions anymore, so I don't know how we're going to look at that baseline for future years, because there will be a big dip in 2020, but beyond that, like, are all of our emissions going to go up if everything goes back to normal again? And then also with electricity use, all of our electricity use has gone down tremendously. A lot of classes have transitioned to remote learning. So students are no longer, or staff, some staff are no longer coming to campus. So that's all going to change with all of our climate action plans, I'm assuming. But as far as the bike share, I think the biggest challenge initially was when the pandemic started, there was a lack of supply of bikes because everybody wanted to do something outside, get outside. So we had about a month delay in getting on back order for our bikes, which is nothing, in terms of 2020 time. But we did have a month delay. And so, and I didn't have students here on campus to help with the install or anything like that. So that was another challenge. Another concern with the bike share was it's a shared bike. So we had to send out an all campus email that we clean the bikes, daily with disinfectant. You social distance when you're riding. And then something I did mention in that email as well is that, sunlight and exercise is good for your overall health. So that is something that I did mention, that you know, just get out and ride, you know, rather than stay inside all day. So, but those were some of the challenges we had and the changes with our climate action plan.
I think that's a good lesson for everybody. I need to do more of that, spending too much time inside. John, do you have anything to add on that?
You know, not a lot other than, you know, I think, well, you know, if you survive in this field long enough, then I think what you do is you kind of temper the peaks and the valleys, and COVID really pushed that, I think. So in other words, there were some short-term, immediate things that were very disconcerting that happened. Our volume of waste on campus went through the roof because we had people in quarantine and everything was disposable. And there was just no way to stop that freight train from happening. We know how to throw things out and we're really good at it. Some good things that happened was, you know, we're now taking a second look at, you know, the value of remote learning and remote meetings. And, you know, maybe in the future we'll see, you know, can we do some conferences without the actual impact of travel? And can we meet with colleagues without, you know, hopping in our car to drive across campus as frequently as we have in the past, and those types of things. So I would say that, you know, the impacts of COVID and the pandemic, how they sort of changed things was, you know, I try not to get too caught up in all the extremely short-term proximate stuff and focus on the ultimate stuff. And we had a really, really big win this summer. I always talk about our sustainability and climate action plan, and we are getting ready to update our third sustainability and climate action plan. But at the same time, the university was working on its, what we're calling the third century plan, because it is our third century as a university. And that's our big strategic plan for campus. And diversity, equity, and inclusion and sustainability are the two fundamental pillars in that. So we now have, you know, I think our sustainability work is put in a profile and at a level that we just haven't had before, despite all of our success. It's at a new level. It's now the president and our senior administration is taking ownership over it. So that's the kind of stuff that I think is, you know, keeps us going when we can have victories like that. Like Ben, our
Can anybody else hear John, or is it just me?
I can't hear
Okay,
him.
John, sorry. We can't hear you all of a sudden. I don't know why. I'll come back to you. I'm going to pivot. Susan, when you're talking about your resilience planning, what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced in starting the plan, and what do you expect to do first? Where do you begin?
So the hurdles were the very thing that our optimistic selves did not anticipate, which is that we were not really staffed up to do a plan. So, you know, you think you can do these things. You're like, well, I can take a certain amount of time every day or every week or whatever. And we've since we started doing all our climate work at Agnes Scott, I always say we've been a do-it-ourselves campus, but part of that is because we don't have any money to pay consultants campus. So we're, you know, we have students do our greenhouse gas inventory, like several people have mentioned, work on our climate action plan. So we were really thin in that, and that's why in the timeline, that's the biggest hurdle, was that we just couldn't get any speed in getting the work done. So the fortunate thing was this task force, I'm still in sort of disbelief that they have hung with us through 2+ years. I mean, literally the same people that started with us, whether it's the fire chief from the city of Decatur or the dean of students representative of Agnes Scott, they've stuck with us through it. And I'm really grateful. And I think that also reflects the importance of these issues. When I look at John's flooding photos, I'm like, you know, that is these extreme rain events here that are so dramatic for us, and it's, you know, people really, everyone at that table really knows that. So speaking of that, your other part of your question, the first things that we have started implementing or that we will have actually been emergency response things. We've realized the lack of coordination between the small city and the small college, you know, where we're nimble and we can find each other when we need each other, but we don't have some very basic things in place. And it's really interesting to me that it's the climate resilience plan that has made that happen. You know, not a dictate from the city government or whatever, but it's actually been this plan that's brought everybody to the same table. So we now have a regular meeting of those of all the people that deal with emergency response directly, and then this larger group of people that do energy and waste diversion, et cetera, understanding how that works, right? So so really that's by far first steps. And then the other thing sort of simultaneously, and this was woven a bit in the presentation, is dealing with diversity and equity. This is really important to our student body. Agnes Scott's ranked as one of the most diverse student bodies in the country. I think we're like 5th in the some of the national rankings, which is not what people expect of this small school in the Southeast. So, so tying social justice and equity and community engagement has been important, and that's what the grant has really helped us do better. So,
John, I think we got you back there. Do you want to? Can I come back to you from earlier? Do you want to try it?
Oh, sure. Can you hear me? Okay, good. No, I actually probably started rambling, and GoToWebinar recognized that and just cut my audio. So I don't think I have a lot more to say. I was probably self-entertaining at that point.
Aurora, were you going to add anything, or I'll move on to the next question?
I could add just one minor thing. I mean, like the connections here. So I love it that Ben launched, you know, more bike share in Nebraska, because one of the things that we did in Pittsburgh is we had piloted a bike share offering with our local nonprofit bike share last year, just for first year students. We didn't get a chance to see that all the way into spring when more people could ride due to COVID. And so there was a question about whether or not we would do it again. And we just bit the bullet and we gave access to all students, faculty, and staff for that program. And it's been great. You know, whether employees are using it to ride, you know, just from home and get out and, you know, be healthy, or students are using it to get around campus because they don't want to be on transit or on a shuttle. I think it's been an amazing program.
Or I'm going to come back to you next. And just as a, you know, commentary, I have family that lives in Pittsburgh, and I was driving back to Pittsburgh last weekend and crossing one of the bridges on, I think it was the Allegheny and Monongahela River. And I was driving, so I couldn't, you know, obviously not take pictures at the same time, but just barges and barges and barges of coal. And it's still a thing. Like, it's just amazing to me that in 2020, I'm still seeing barges of coal on a river. However, with respect to your presentation, what's the top hurdle for Pitt in making the jump from steam to hot water, which would be ideal? You want to talk about that?
Well, I mean, I think you queued up the answer right there, Michelle. I mean, that's not the only answer. So, I mean, Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania are literally built on fossil fuels, right? Like Oil City is where the first oil well is in the U.S., and that's sort of like in the northwestern part of the state. You know, there's Marcellus Shale fracking in the Pittsburgh region right now, but that energy dynamic has changed over time, and you know, it reflects national trends where, you know, coal has decreased as a percentage of the whole, and natural gas is moving up. And that Belfield boiler plant, the Carrillo steam plant that we talked about, Belfield, we only converted it as a steam collaborative in 2012, I think, from coal to natural gas. So, you know, we're making some baby steps here. But the major hurdle in sort of like, why wouldn't we just, you know, throw $1 billion at this like Stanford did and rip up the streets and put in hot water? You know, it's a process to do this. This is real built underground infrastructure that we are all built on top of and connected to. So we want to make sure that we engage all voices, you know, really make a considered approach that's equitable for all of the users, but also the rest of the neighborhood. And that's why this collaboration with the city and Green Building Alliance is so nice. I will also say, you know, part of what we're doing as a university in the renewable energy space is we have 2 power purchase agreements right now for renewables that are fewer than 25 miles from our campus. And Pennsylvania is behind in renewables, so we like to, you know, step out in front and show that it can be done, and it's economically beneficial to both Pitt and the region, as well as the environmental and social benefits.
A couple of years ago, I live in Northern Virginia now, and a couple of years ago, the state legislature changed, and it's really had a very almost immediate impact on everything from, you know, statutes in Richmond to the ease with which you can enter into renewable contracts. It's just really made a big difference, you know, at the campus level, local level, when some of these changes happened in local elections. I'm not as familiar with each of your jurisdictions. I know that the national picture might change. We still have 60 more days to figure that out. But I'm wondering if any of you and your campuses are anticipating what that might look like in the coming year. Do you see opportunities with respect to some policy activities that might be happening, or are you just going to, you know, business as usual, but continue to be aggressive with what's happening on your campus and in your community? And, you know, Susan, I still know you're undecided there in Georgia, so.
I was wondering if I was going to make it through this without anyone bringing that up. It's not, it's constantly on our mind. So anyway, the headline politics to the side. Because we've had so little, I kind of mentioned it quickly when talking about the way we've reduced our footprint. We've had so little support for renewables here. We've always tried to do everything we can without that support. So we have a green revolving fund, and that's how we've been able to really focus on efficiency. And that's still gangbusters. I mean, I remember our previous president asked me, you know, is there going to be, when can we stop the green revolving fund? I was like, it's for the rest of my life. There's a, you know, it's like, it never stops, right? So, because we've already replaced light bulbs, we replaced 10 years ago, we've already replaced the T12s to T8s to LED, right? So anyway, so there's that. So we put a lot of our time and money there. But believe this or not, Georgia did not even, you could not do a power purchase agreement in Georgia until the legislature changed that. I think it was about 3 years ago now. And so I mean, literally our hands were tied. We couldn't do a PPA. Like, and I can't tell you how everybody would come from somewhere else and say, well, you should do a PPA. And I would be like, stop talking, we can't do a PPA. So, but now we can. And so we're looking at some really cool, there's one good thing about when you come along later, which we have about a lot of things, sometimes things are more creative. So there are these creative financing folks out there now that really think differently about how you package fundraising, with you know, educational resources, with nonprofit status, with an investor, you know, so your financing looks very different. And a SEPA is what we call it here because we're Georgia, so we can't call it the thing we used to not be able to do. So anyway, so you know, we see the renewable front changing, but it's really us keeping our nose to the grindstone. It's not a handout. So
I just wanted to mention that, you know, I came to Nebraska at the right time. Even though we are a really conservative state, you mentioned seeing barges of coal in Pittsburgh, and you know, I did see that on the trains, but I guess I'm giving you hope for everyone around the whole country. Now I see wind turbine blades on train cars more than well, it's about the same as I see coal, not more. But then also in Nebraska, we have a lot of land available, and wind and solar projects are booming right now. You know, similar to Iowa, where my home state, that took the lead, you know, about 20 years ago. and now Nebraska's catching up with Iowa. So there's, many wind farms going up in central Nebraska. They provide power to some of the big, large data centers. So like Facebook has a data center in Pumilio that's going to be powered completely by wind. And so we have a lot of those large projects going up. Aurora, originally from Kearney, we bought into a power purchase agreement in Kearney with a solar farm that's providing 100% of our power for one of our campuses. So I guess the policy really didn't matter as much as the economics and the land available. And I think, it's coming, and it's like a train. You can't really stop it. You can run away for as long as you can, but it's eventually going to catch up to you.
So the policy hope in Pennsylvania is RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which the Pennsylvania governor has said that we're going to join as the last state in the Mid-Atlantic Northeast to do, which puts basically a regional market on greenhouse gas emissions, which will be transformative for the state. A lot of the state's plans there are actually related to transportation, which I think will play out very interestingly.
Yeah, and I'll just add, from a New York perspective, obviously our administration at the national level has been unkind to the reality of climate change, but at the state level, we've probably, arguably, have had our strongest 4 years ever. We've been a part of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative for some years, since its inception, actually. But, last year we just passed the Climate Leadership and Communities Protection Act, which is a really, really aggressive law that mandates that New York State will be, on all renewables by 2040 and be basically a carbon-free, economy-wide state by 2050. So, the state's moved forward with that, as well as a whole bunch of other legislation and laws that just make work a little bit easier at the campus level. However, whatever happens at the national level makes things easier, obviously, to implement at the state level. Instead of swimming against the current, you're going with it. So we expect that hopefully things will get a little bit easier to implement, and we're pretty excited about the path forward.
So then we're back to Susan and Georgia. So we have one last question here, and it was about Aurora. I think it was your presentation, the 2030 challenge. Is there a list, or can you share a link of about that in the chat, or we can send it out afterwards? Is there a list of design or engineer firms that have officially signed on? So I think, is there a list of?
I can share that link in the chat for both the Architecture 2030 Challenge, and there's a list of firms that have signed on to say that all their new construction and renovations will achieve those goals. And then there's a separate list that I'll add in the chat for the Pittsburgh 2030 district. So there's geographic areas where it's more of a real estate developer owner approach as well. I will say, and I put this in an ASHE chat earlier this week, we are serious about those goals for new construction and renovations, and we put those 2030 energy use intensity and water use intensity goals in our RFPs for new projects. And it's very interesting to see design teams try to reach them. They are not easy, but you will not get there if you are not intentional about it, especially for your new buildings.
Well, great. Thank you, everybody. I just want to thank again our speakers, presenters here, and the attendees that stayed on the line. We will post this presentation. We'll post the recording next week and share it back out with everybody. If you email communications@secondnature.org, we're happy to share the slide deck with you as well. Stay tuned for more progress from these Acceleration Fund winners and others. We're grateful for your contributions, not just to your campus community, but to the network more broadly, so we can continue to learn from each other, which is especially important since we can't be together this year. So thank you, everybody, for your time, and have a good weekend. We'll stay in touch. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.